When Melania Trump hurled a public insult at Jasmine Crockett, millions expected her to break. Instead, Jasmine turned that attack into a historic moment that redefined dignity and justice across America. What secret struck like thunder and left a nation gasping for breath? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The hearing chamber of the United States Congress burned under blinding white lights, cameras sweeping like predators, transmitting every breath to tens of millions glued to their screens. The air was razor sharp, the silence suffocating, the kind that promised blood before words. The doors slammed open. Melania Trump entered in a spotless white dress, her heels striking like gunfire against marble. She moved like a queen claiming territory, her face carved in disdain, lips curled into a mocking half-smile. Her eyes scanned the chamber with icy contempt, daring anyone to challenge her. The press exploded with flashes, each one freezing her arrogance forever. Across from her, Jasmine Crockett sat motionless, straight as iron, a thick folder before her like a loaded weapon, her jaw clenched, eyes burning unshaken. Before them loomed the banner, Ethics and Dignity in Public Life. None in the room yet knew they were about to witness a duel between aristocratic scorn and the honor of blood long despised. The silence from the opening moments had not yet faded when Melania Trump leaned forward toward the microphone. She did not wait for a single question. Her voice was calm, steady, but chilling in its coldness, like steel slicing the air. There are bloodlines born to serve, and there are bloodlines destined to lead. Miss Crockett, unfortunately, you belong to the first. The words landed like bullets across the chamber. A wave of shock froze the air. Senators' stiffened brows furrowed, unsure whether they had truly heard what had just been said. Reporters caught mid-sentence stopped their pens above paper, the scratching of ink silenced in an instant. The entire hearing room hung in suspense, a knife's edge waiting to drop. Melania's pause lasted only long enough to savor the stillness. Then with a flick of disdain, she pressed further, her tone rising, cutting through the chamber like thunder. History never remembers those who come from poor neighborhoods, from nameless families. They are only shadows standing behind people like me. Gasps broke from the gallery. It was not just insult, it was a strike against the very roots of Jasmine's existence. And then, as if to drive the dagger deeper, Melania slammed her hand down on the desk. The sound cracked through the hall like an explosion. Papers shook, microphones rattled, and the chamber reverberated, as though struck by lightning. She leaned closer, her eyes burning with contempt, and declared, "You do not deserve to sit here for a moment." Even the cameras seemed to flinch. The echo of the blow rang out, hanging in the air, like a gunshot. Then Melania sat back, lips curled in satisfaction. She began to clap slowly, each strike deliberate, echoing through the chamber. It was mocking applause, a twisted performance staged for millions watching live. Her voice, dripping with sarcasm, filled the silence. Bravo. How amusing that someone on the margins of history thinks she can lecture me about dignity. The smirk on her face widened, daring Jasmine to respond, daring the chamber to breathe again. The cameras, relentless, swung to capture the fallout. They zoomed in on the crowd, raw human reactions now filling the hall. A man in his 50s dropped his head into his hands, unable to look any longer. Beside him, an elderly woman clutched her chest, tears spilling freely as the cruelty of the words washed over her. Every face became a canvas of disbelief and horror, and the broadcast carried those expressions into living rooms across America. The viewers at home could feel the sting, could feel the insult vibrate through the screen. The hearing was no longer political, it was personal, brutal, and unrestrained. Jasmine did not hesitate. She stepped forward with deliberate precision, her heels echoing like gunfire on marble. Without asking, she took the green folder from Ivanka's hands, opened it, and flipped through the pages with rapid certainty. Her eyes narrowed, then flashed with sharp recognition. She turned the folder toward the chamber, her voice slicing through the air. "You thought I wouldn't notice?" The room froze, waiting. Jasmine stabbed her finger at the page. This signature, Ivanka's so-called confirmation, is printed in a computer font. Not handwritten, not real. Shock detonated. Senators recoiled. Journalists scrambled. Ivanka's smile withered in an instant, the blood draining from her face. Jasmine closed the folder, her tone colder, final. "This is fabricated evidence, and it came directly from your office. The impact was merciless. In trying to fight back, Ivanka had handed Jasmine the knife. The twist landed brutal and undeniable. Ivanka's counterattack had exposed the rot of her own lies. The silence from the previous moment snapped like a wire, and Jasmine moved. She raised a time-worn folder above the microphone's edges, yellowed and soft. From use, the label, Stark Shirley Chisholm. In a clear, steady tone, she said Shirley Chisholm was the first black woman elected to the United States Congress in 1968, an educator and trailblazer who shattered barriers right here. The paper lifted like a banner in her hand, catching the light as if it had its own pulse. The room leaned forward as one breath held, drawn by the gravity of a name that still shook the walls. Her voice rolled through the chamber, ringing off marble and brass. This is the blood you call inferior. This very blood carved its name into history in this chamber. The syllables struck like hammers, measured heavy, impossible to ignore. Jasmine's arm stayed lifted, the old folder gleaming like a relic rescued from a fire. The cameras drank in every crease of the paper, proof that the past was not dead but waiting to be read. The reaction came like a wave breaking over stone. Hands clapped, first in small pockets of courage, then in a rush that filled the room and rattled the rails. The sound rose and rose until it became a storm rolling across the hall. Melania sprang to her feet, face sharp with fury, and shouted, "That is meaningless, past." The roar swallowed her words, a cascade of boos and cries, rolling over the dais and drowning the outburst. The chairman's gavel pounded, but wood could not outshout truth carried on 1,000 hands. Jasmine let the noise crest, and when it broke, she stepped into the hush, as if stepping onto solid ground. Chisholm said, "If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And today I bring that chair to remind you we do not ask permission to exist in history." Each sentence landed with the authority of oath and verdict final. She did not blink, she did not flinch, she did not lower the folder. Her free hand cut a narrow line through the air, tracing a path from balcony to record book. The chamber felt smaller now, pulled tight around the words that would not release. The cameras swept the faces that bore witness, catching tears before they fell. A gray-haired man wiped his eyes with the back of his hand jaw, trembling as he rose. A woman in her 70s pressed a tissue to her cheek, then stood as well, shoulders shaking but steady. Lawmakers pushed back their chairs and rose to their feet, some clapping, some holding a hand to the heart, all fixed on the folder in Jasmine's grasp. Tears gleamed in the white lights, resolve hardened in the hush between claps. And in that live broadcast stillness, the name Shirley Chisholm burned again, bright enough to light the room. No one moved. The applause held like a tide suspended mid-crash over the silent floor. The thunder of applause still echoed when the chamber began to settle and the air dropped into a brittle silence. Melania leaned sideways toward her attorney, her voice low, but the hot mic betrayed her. "They will forget," she muttered with a satisfied smirk. "The past has no value." The words carried across the speakers, sharp and poisonous, and every person in the room heard them. A few conservative senators shifted in their seats, nodding, as if she still had ground to stand on, still a chance to strike back. The cameras cut to Jasmine. She had not moved. Her spine remained straight, her hands flat on the desk, the folder before her unopened for now. Her eyes, though, had changed cold, unblinking, sharpened into blades. She did not speak, and that silence was heavier than any rebuttal. The restraint radiated power, and suddenly Melania's smugness looked brittle. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, sensing the shift, unsure of what would come next. Slowly the tension spread like fire under the floorboards. The chamber grew unnervingly still, as if everyone were holding their breath together. The cameras moved in deliberate, slow pans, faces frozen, jaws locked, eyes wide. A man in the gallery gripped the railing with white knuckles. A woman clutched her rosary lips, trembling with unsaid prayers. The silence was no longer weakness, it was a countdown. The entire room had become a live bomb, its timer ticking in the hush. Every second dragged tighter, every inhale sharper, and the audience could feel it. Jasmine's silence had become her weapon, a sharpened edge poised to cut. And as Melania shifted uneasily in her chair for the first time that night, she looked uncertain. The silence had become unbearable. And then Jasmine moved. She reached into the folder before her with steady, deliberate hands and pulled out a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age but stamped with the unmistakable seal of Dallas. She raised it high so the cameras could drink in every crease, every faded corner. Her voice cracked for just a heartbeat, but when she spoke, it rang with the force of iron. This is the Certificate of Citizen of Merit Dallas 1985, awarded to my father, a sanitation worker. He was honored because when disease threatened to spread from the overflowing waste, he stepped forward. While others turned away in fear, my father climbed into the filth, cleared the refuse, and saved an entire neighborhood from an epidemic. An inferior bloodline. No, this is the blood that kept America's streets clean. This is the blood that made neighborhoods safe for children. The chamber erupted in gasps. Reporters fumbled for camera shutters snapping like gunfire. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, watching history being rewritten in real time. Jasmine lowered the certificate slightly, her eyes blazing. The paper shook not from weakness, but from the weight of memory carried in her hands. And then came the voice that no one expected. From the gallery, an old man rose to his feet, silver hair catching the light, his shoulders bent with age, but his spirit unbroken. In his hand, he clutched a battered yellow hard hat, chipped and scarred from years of labor. His voice trembled, but carried across the chamber like thunder. I worked with her father. I was there. I saw him go into the heaps of trash when everyone else was too afraid. Rats swarmed, a disease was already spreading. Children were falling sick. He didn't run, he fought it. He cleared every street, every alley. He saved our whole block. He saved lives, including mine. The chamber exploded. Senators rose from their seats, clapping furiously, some pounding their fists on the desks. The gallery erupted in tears and cheers, people holding each other as if they too had been saved that day. The camera zoomed in on the old man's weathered face, every wrinkle etched with sacrifice, every tear gleaming under the merciless lights. The roar was deafening. Some cried openly, others raised their fists, others pressed hands to their hearts. Jasmine stood tall, holding the certificate like a banner of truth, and the old worker stood beside her, helmet raised like a flag of honor. And across from them sat Melania. The color drained from her face, her lips pressed into a thin line. The smirk that once dripped with arrogance had vanished. For the first time that night, she had no words, her bravado crushed under the storm of applause and the crushing weight of truth. The storm of applause still thundered in the chamber, and then the focus shifted. Melania rose abruptly from her chair, her face drained of color, the once perfect poise shattered. Cameras exploded with flashes, capturing every falter in her step as she turned toward the exit. Her heels struck the floor too fast, too loud, betraying panic where there had once been icy elegance. The queenly stride she had carried into the room was gone. In its place was the stumbling retreat of someone desperate to escape. The chamber that had once been her stage was now a gauntlet of judgment, every lens locking on her defeat. She pushed past aides who scrambled to follow, but their attempts to shield her only highlighted her collapse. The shutters clattered like a drumbeat of humiliation, each photo sealing the image of her downfall into the public record. Her head dipped low, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. No defiant glance, no final words, only silence, heavy and bitter, trailed behind her as she vanished through the great doors. What had entered as arrogance now fled as failure. At the table, Jasmine remained still, her presence unshaken by the chaos. She sat tall, her back straight as steel, her eyes burning bright in the merciless light. The folder lay closed before her now, but the memory of what she had drawn from it still lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Her calm was not weakness, but victory, a victory so complete it needed no celebration. The applause swelled around her, rising and falling like waves, and still she held her composure, embodying the dignity she had fought to defend. The chairman's gavel cut through the noise, commanding silence without force. He leaned into the microphone, his voice solemn but proud, carrying across the chamber and through the broadcast. Thank you, Congresswoman Crockett. You have not only defended yourself, you have defended the honor of history. The words struck like a verdict, final and unshakable, the seal on everything that had just unfolded. The cameras seized the moment, splitting their focus in a deliberate, devastating contrast. On one side, Melania's figure retreating into the shadows of the corridor, her back turned, her posture collapsed, a woman consumed by defeat. On the other side, Jasmine, illuminated under the blinding lights, still seated, but surrounded by outstretched hands. Colleagues leaned in to shake her hand, to grasp her shoulder, to meet her eyes with gratitude. Members of the gallery reached over the rails, trying to touch even the air around her. The parallel was inescapable. The imagery seared into the minds of millions watching at home. Melania leaving in silence, swallowed by disgrace. Jasmine remaining unbroken, her figure glowing in the light of justice. One woman walked away diminished. The other stayed behind, lifted by the weight of truth in the respect of a nation. The story no longer belonged to Melania's insults, it belonged to Jasmine's triumph. The image of Melania fleeing the chamber and Jasmine remaining in the light of justice had not yet faded when the media struck. Within hours, every major newspaper in America carried the same message. Headlines screamed in bold type across front pages, "Jasmine Crockett turns humiliation into historic victory." Editorials poured in, framing the clash not as a routine hearing, but as a turning point in political and cultural history. Network anchors replayed the footage in slow motion. The moment Jasmine raised the yellowed certificate, the second Harold Jenkins lifted his battered helmet, the exact instant Melania's composure cracked. One primetime anchor declared it live on air. "This is the second Chisholm moment." The reference was deliberate and heavy, linking Jasmine to Shirley Chisholm's legacy and declaring her the inheritor of a torch passed down through generations. The footage dominated television screens. Talk shows dissected it frame by frame, highlighting Jasmine's steady gaze and contrasting it with Melania's desperate retreat. Pundits who had dismissed the hearing as political theater now called it the most consequential confrontation of the decade. Even late-night comedians paused their usual routines, playing the clip, not for laughs, but with awe, saying, "Sometimes truth is louder than any joke we could write." The hearing had escaped politics, it had entered legend. And on social media, the wave became a flood. The clip of Jasmine's words, an inferior bloodline. "No, this is the blood that kept America's streets clean. This is the blood that made neighborhoods safe for children," spread across platforms within minutes. Millions shared it, each post adding fire. Hashtags trended in every corner of the country, and within a day the video had tens of millions of views. The comment sections filled with raw emotion. One post read, "She didn't just speak for herself, she spoke for all of us who've been told our blood didn't count." Another read, "That certificate was more powerful than any crown, any title, any insult." It was no longer Jasmine's fight alone, it was a collective battle claimed by the people. Ordinary citizens became the chorus, amplifying her message. Teachers played the video in classrooms. Pastors quoted her words from pulpits. Community organizers replayed the footage at rallies. One viral comment summed it up best. "She turned their insult into our anthem." The collective voice of the public had transformed Jasmine's defense into a weapon sharper than any accusation. She had not just won, she had reshaped the narrative of what dignity meant in America. Schools responded swiftly. Invitations poured in from high schools, universities, and civic groups. Principals asked her to speak not as a politician, but as a living lesson in resilience. Students studied her testimony as if it were a historical speech, quoting her lines in essays about justice, fairness, and identity. Professors incorporated the video into lectures on civil rights, placing her words alongside Martin Luther King Jr. and Shirley Chisholm. Young people who had only seen history in textbooks suddenly saw it alive in front of them, broadcast in real time. In countless classrooms, Jasmine's voice replaced the silence that once filled those pages. The effect rippled across generations. Elderly citizens, some of whom had lived through segregation, took to Facebook and local newspapers to share the video. They wrote long posts remembering marches, sit-ins, and struggles that had seemed forgotten. One retired teacher wrote, "I marched in 1965. I never thought I would live long enough to see a lawmaker stand in that chamber and carry our voice the way she did." The footage unearthed buried memories, stirring the collective conscience of those who had lived the fight. Grandparents forwarded the video to grandchildren, writing, "Watch this. This is what dignity looks like." The imagery was overwhelming. Elderly viewers saw their own sacrifices mirrored in Jasmine's defiance. Middle-aged viewers, the 50-plus demographic glued to their screens, felt the tug of memory pulling them back to streets filled with protest chants, to television broadcasts showing hoses and dogs turned on children. The resonance was undeniable. This was not a new story. It was the continuation of an old one. and they were watching the next chapter unfold. Jasmine herself leaned into that connection. At a town hall days later, she addressed the flood of attention directly. Standing at a podium, she spoke with the same calm fire that had silenced Melania. In 2020, millions of people took a knee to remind the world that Black lives matter, she said. And today we stand together to remind the world that Black dignity matters too. The room erupted in applause, but beyond the walls, her words ricocheted across television broadcasts and social media feeds. Clips of that statement layered over footage of the protests, knees bent on asphalt, fists raised in silence, streets covered in signs. The parallel was impossible to ignore. Older Americans, particularly those over 50, felt the quake most deeply. For them, the memory of 2020 was still raw, the marches, the clashes, the endless debates about justice and equality. Now, Jasmine had linked that fire to something older, still tying the legacy of Chisholm and the pain of 2020 into a single unbroken line. Commentators noted it with awe. She has built a bridge between generations of struggle. Churches replayed her words on Sunday mornings. Veterans of civil rights marches appeared on talk shows, their voices cracking with emotion as they said, "She reminded us what we fought for." The lesson became clear, written not just in the news but in the hearts of those who watched. Honor was not measured by insults thrown in arrogance, but by the courage to stand after being insulted. Dignity was not granted by power or privilege, but claimed in the face of contempt. The people saw in Jasmine's stance a reflection of themselves, of their parents, their teachers, their neighbors. She had carried more than her own name into that chamber. She had carried theirs. The story hardened into legend as days passed. Commentators continued to call it the second Chisholm moment, while others named it the Dallas Redemption, in honor of her father's legacy. But among ordinary citizens, the title was simpler: The Day Jasmine Stood. That was how it spread in coffee shops, in church halls, and family dinners. The phrase appeared on posters and murals, painted on brick walls, and graffiti scrawled on city underpasses. For those who had once felt invisible, her words were proof that visibility was not a privilege, it was a right. For those who had lived through scorn, her victory was proof that scorn could be shattered. And for those who were watching for the first time, her silence turned weapon, and her defiance had become a blueprint for dignity. And as the applause continued long after the hearing, one truth had crystallized in the public conscience: honor is not in the insult itself, but in the refusal to bow to it. It was the oldest lesson retold through the newest voice. And in Jasmine's victory, millions found their own. The roar of applause had hardly faded when the video began its second life. Clips from the hearing spread across the internet with unstoppable force. Within hours, the footage of Jasmine raising the yellowed certificate and the old man lifting his hard hat was on every social feed in America. By dawn, the numbers were staggering: tens of millions of views across YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok. Screens lit up in kitchens, in union halls, and subway cars. The hearing that had started as a political clash was now a national reckoning. People didn't just watch it, they shared it, replayed it, dissected it frame by frame, as if the nation had been waiting for this moment to erupt. Television networks surrendered their primetime slots to the story. Anchors replayed the scene in slow motion, narrating with voices thick with awe. "Watch closely," one said as the camera lingered on Jasmine's hand, trembling with the weight of the certificate. Another froze the frame on Harold Jenkins, his helmet lifted like a flag, his wrinkles lined with history. "This is not just testimony," the anchor declared. "This is the passing of a torch." Chyrons across the bottom of screens labeled it in bold, the second Chisholm moment. What had been a clash of words inside a chamber was now stamped into public memory as a legend. Veterans were among the first to claim it. Organizations of retired soldiers issued statements saying Jasmine's stand reminded them of why they had fought to defend honor, not titles; to uphold dignity, not arrogance. Videos circulated of veterans saluting their television screens as Jasmine's words played. In community halls, old soldiers played the clip on projectors, telling younger members, "This is courage. Different battlefield, same war." The echoes of their approval gave the moment a weight that crossed uniforms and generations. Teachers soon followed. Across the country, classrooms lit up with the footage. History teachers paused their lessons to project Jasmine's voice onto whiteboards. "Watch this," they told their students. This is history happening before your eyes. Students scribbled notes furiously, their essays now filled with references to the certificate, the hard hat, the roar of applause. College professors inserted the video into lectures on civil rights, placing Jasmine's words alongside Martin Luther King Jr. and Shirley Chisholm. For the first time, many young people saw history not as something in books, but as something alive broadcast on their phones, demanding their attention. Civil rights organizations seized on the moment with precision. Flyers were printed with Jasmine's quotes in bold letters. "This is the blood that kept America's streets clean. This is the blood that made neighborhoods safe for children." Marches echoed the words through megaphones, chants rising like thunder in city streets. Legal defense funds used the hearing as a rallying cry, reminding donors and activists that the fight for dignity was not finished but fueled anew. Community centers screened the footage nightly, each replay turning the hearing into a kind of civic scripture. Commentators reached for language strong enough to carry the weight. One headline declared Jasmine Crockett the torchbearer after Chisholm. Another read, "From trash heaps to triumph, a father's legacy becomes a nation's lesson." Editorials in major papers compared the moment to Selma, to Montgomery, to the great inflection points of American conscience. Writers argued that Jasmine had not just answered an insult, she had defined a generation. One columnist wrote simply, "She showed us that dignity bleeds through bloodlines, but courage writes the record." The message rang out clear, louder than the hearing itself. Blood did not decide dignity. No accident of birth could declare a life inferior. History was not confined to dusty textbooks, it was carved in action, in choices made, when the world demanded silence. And justice could not survive without voices that refused to bow, even when drenched in scorn. This was the creed drawn from the chamber, the creed repeated in classrooms, in pulpits, in living rooms, until it thundered louder than Melania's insults ever had. The effect on ordinary citizens was visceral. A mother in Detroit replayed the video for her children, her eyes wet with tears. "Do you see," she whispered, "this is what it means to stand tall." A factory worker in Ohio projected the clip on the wall of his union hall, telling his coworkers, "This is what we fight for every day." In the South, elders who had marched in the 1960s wrote letters to their grandchildren, enclosing links to the video telling them, "This is our struggle continuing in you." Across the nation, people found themselves connected, not by politics but by pride, in a single moment of unshakable truth. The video's power lay not just in Jasmine's words but in the imagery that surrounded them. The certificate, fragile yet indestructible. The helmet, battered but unbroken. The applause, a storm no gavel could contain. And the silence, the devastating silence of Melania Trump, her arrogance collapsed under the weight of dignity made visible. These images fused together, forming an iconography that would be studied and remembered. They were not just moments, they were symbols carved into the memory of a nation. Even critics who had dismissed Jasmine before were forced to concede. Editorials that once painted her as inexperienced now hailed her as unflinching. One pundit admitted on live television, "I underestimated her." We all did. But she stood taller than the room, and the room will never forget. The narrative had shifted permanently. The insult had been swallowed by the response, leaving only the echo of triumph. In universities, entire courses began planning to include the hearing as a case study. Law schools dissected her words as examples of rhetorical precision. Sociology professors framed the exchange as a study of power and resistance. Political science departments compared the imagery to historic flashpoints in American democracy. The moment had outgrown its origin. It had become a tool, a lesson, a compass. And then came the final image, the one replayed endlessly in closing montages. Jasmine Crockett leaving the chamber, the yellowed certificate still in her hand. She did not raise it this time. She simply held it close as though it were a living fragment of her father's heartbeat. The cameras followed their lenses, drinking in every detail, the creases of the paper, the firmness of her grip, the unbroken steel in her gaze. The light struck her face just so, painting her not as a politician, but as a guardian of memory. Reporters shouted questions, flashes erupted like fireworks, but Jasmine said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence was eloquent, carrying more weight than words could. As she stepped into the corridor, the cameras tilted upward, capturing her face framed against the marble and the lights above. The image burned itself into history, Jasmine Crockett holding her father's legacy, bathed in light, a solitary figure who had carried the honor of a people through fire. The networks ran that shot over and over. Commentators called it the image of the year. Activists called it the proof we needed. Teachers called it the face of dignity. And across millions of homes, families paused, watching not just a woman, but a symbol, the keeper of a nation's honor, the one who had turned insult into immortality. She did not ask for the title. But in the eyes of a nation, Jasmine Crockett had become what one commentator named her, with finality, the torch of the generation after Chisholm. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.